And I had a nurse named Pearl Nelson, military. She'd come in and do things that I don't think you learn in medical school, nursing school. She'd whisper in my ear. I couldn't understand her. She'd whisper, she'd lean down. She'd actually breathe on me to make sure that there was a connection, a human connection. Representative Jackie, are you here? Where's Jackie? I didn't think she was going to be here.
I'm not being facetious. Well, President Harris led this effort.
Following with great, how can I say it? Attention. And the percentage of the men who do so, end of quote. Repeat the line. Biden's being Biden's being an extremist. America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. I was in the foothills of the Himalayas with Xi Jinping.
I'm sorry. Joining me now, my buddy John Phillips of the John Phillips Show. Okay, John, Joe Biden says he's running for office. I have a crazy theory. It's just a theory. I know you'll shoot it down. I think it's a load of crap. I don't think he's running. I think the system is going to push him out. They're going to use the Hunter Biden stuff to push him out so they can welcome Gavin Newsom in because he's just too much of a liability. He can't keep the lies inside of his mouth anymore. That's my theory.
You know, after watching all of those clips that you just played, it brought me back to my childhood because our home in Orange County, California was close to an old folks home. And every once in a while, one of them would break out and they'd just kind of be wandering down the street. They wouldn't know where they were. My mom would identify what was going on almost immediately. She'd invite them in for tea and then we'd call the home and then we'd tell them, you lost another one, and they'd come by and pick them up. That's what seeing Joe Biden right now makes me think of. And I think that there's a certain element of truth to what you just said. Certainly, Biden serves a couple of purposes for the Democrats. First and foremost, he's an incumbent with all of the power of incumbency, so he's going to be in the news every day. He has incumbent next to his name on the ballot, which is an attractive ballot title, and he controls the ability to appoint and the executive branch of the federal government. He also prevents Kamala Harris from becoming the Democratic nominee, which is what scares the living bejesus out of all of them. Gavin Newsom, as you mentioned, is essentially already running for president. What he's doing right now is essentially making a shadow run. He's a candidate. He's traveling around the country. He's raising and spending money around the country. And anytime he's asked if he's running for president, of course I'm not running for president. Why would you assume I'm running for president? I have sub-zero interest in running for president. And I think what his play is right now is essentially he's betting that this is 1968 and Joe Biden is Lyndon Johnson. Because Lyndon Johnson said that he would run for re-election, put his name on the ballot, and then deep into the process decided that he wasn't going to run for one reason or another. And the candidates who already had some kind of organization that existed had a much better leg up on the other candidates. And that's ultimately how Hubert Humphrey was able to get the nomination. Gavin Newsom is trying to become this year's Hubert Humphrey.
Okay. What do you make of Joe Biden keeping Dome on as vice president? Because she adds nothing to the ticket. She never added anything. I get it. You had to go for a token in the beginning. I had to go with the black woman. I understand that. But those days are past. If she doesn't help the ticket at all, in fact, you could easily argue she hurts it, why keep Dome on board?
How do you get rid of her? I guess if there was an opening on the Supreme Court, you could put her there. But if you get rid of her, she's going to say that she's going to say that she's the victim of sexism. She's going to say that she's the victim of racism. And the one way she could really lash out at Joe Biden in a way that would do real damage, which is why they can never get rid of her, is she can say, you know what? We've had meetings behind closed doors and Biden is losing it. He has no short-term memory. He's with you in the moment and then he forgets everything. And it's all smoke and mirrors, and they make him look like he's in charge, and they make him look like he's the president, but he's not totally there. It's not Joe's fault that I'm being taken off the ticket. It's the people who are running that presidency. That would absolutely be the fatal blow to him. And she's the one person who can do that. You notice that was the road that they took with Dianne Feinstein when they decided that she was in the way and they wanted to get serious about pushing her out. The people close to her said that she was losing it.
Very quickly.
There are 50 former national intelligence folks who said that what he's accusing me of is a Russian plant. They have said that this has all the 5 former heads of the CIA, both parties, say what he's saying is a bunch of garbage. Nobody believes it except his and his good friend Rudy Giuliani.
You mean the laptop is now another Russia hoax?
That's exactly what.
Is this
that's
where you're
exactly
going?
what.
This is
told.
where he's going. The laptop is Russia,
Yes.
Russia,
Gentlemen,
Russia.
I want to stay on the issue of race.
You
okay?
have to be kidding. Here we
Mr.
go
President?
again with Russia.
My favorite part of that clip is the moderator jumping on the grenade for Joe Biden. I want to stay focused on race. Oh, I'm sure you do. Joining me now, Natalie Winters, executive editor, War Room. Natalie, give us a little of your brilliant insight on this letter. There was a letter. Where did this thing come from?
There was. Thank you so much for having me, Jesse. I think the really important point that hasn't been made about this letter enough, and that I will continue to make, is that the 51 signatories of it, yes, they may be members of the intelligence community, but they are members of the swamp, members of the permanent political class, the people who, whether it's a Republican or Democrat, anyone with the exception of Donald Trump in power, they've made millions of dollars in their consulting fees. Everyone who is on that letter, yeah, they used to work in the federal government, but they leveraged, they parlayed those connections to somehow get some cushy consulting gig. And you know what? Donald Trump, this concept that no more foreign wars, ending this globalist agenda abroad, that was really, really, really bad for business. So these people wanted to do everything they could to keep Donald Trump out of office. And obviously the Hunter Biden hard drive was glaring evidence of the Biden family corruption and definitely would have tanked his candidacy in 2020. And now we're finally learning from congressional subpoenas that it was just that. It was campaign propaganda. In other words, now Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who was then a campaign advisor to Joe Biden at the time, was intimately responsible for reaching out to coordinate this letter. So it never should have been perceived as unbiased, intel reporting, but rather just as a press release from the Biden campaign.
Natalie, this is the kind of thing that destroys the public trust in our institutions. When we've watched the conduct of the FBI, we watched the conduct of the CIA. How are normal Americans supposed to look at this government for anything now? I'll tell you, me personally, call me a conspiracy theorist. I think I'm being lied to about everything. No matter what they tell me now, I assume you're lying to me because you've been lying to me about everything. Why would I assume anything else?
You are, and I think COVID is probably the best example of that in modern history, if not frankly, all of history. And this slogan, trust the experts, they don't just get to hurl that at us and then freak out when we don't listen to them, because time and time again, the evidence, and frankly, it's the evidence that they fight, whether it's through legal battles or hide it so you can only get it through Freedom of Information Act requests, this evidence that they hide, frankly, always proves the conspiracy theorists right. And like I said, it all comes down to power, whether that's power in the form of money and nice, cushy consulting contracts for these defense contractor types who really compose and comprise a lot of the signatories on that letter, or the fact that deep down, all of these people are just far left, Democratic, and frankly, in some cases, Marxist political activists. But I think this semblance, this notion, this idea that people who operate in DC, right, the Anthony Fauci types of the world, these nonpartisan bureaucrats, that is so far gone. These people are political apparatchiks who do the dirty work of these puppets, just like Joe Biden, but people who subscribe to really a whole different system, a whole different conception of the world order, whereby the United States and our principles of limited government and the idea that you can leave your house if you aren't vaccinated and you don't have an amazing social credit score, they fundamentally want to change the way the world operates. And they use every single crisis, even something's not a crisis, they'll turn it into a crisis, but they're using it to advance a very, very nefarious social agenda.
Are you expecting that there will be moves to impeach Joe Biden?
I suspect that, ma'am. If this cover-up shows what's going on that we all assume is going on, and that the 51 folks were basically lied to and showed false documentation. How can you not?
That is quite a story that nobody's talking about. Joining me now, chairman of the wonderful House Freedom Caucus, but what we do without these people, Congressman Scott Perry of the great state of Pennsylvania. Congressman, Joe Biden, that is a little bit of a surprise to me. Not that I don't think he deserves it. I have always heard that Mayorkas, he was on the chopping block. I have not heard the president, though. Is there any merit to that?
Well, I don't know that there's merit yet, but I would say that I'm one of the people that sat in Treasury last week and went through hours of suspicious activity reports, Jesse, 3 big binders of them, of which we only scratched the surface. We came up with more of the Biden family receiving money from accounts that can't be identified, sending it to the accounts that can't be identified, from individuals or organizations that can't be identified. It's all very concerning, but until we have the proof in our hands, whether it's intelligence agents that were that falsified information to benefit the President Biden, or whether it's influence peddling that can be proven, I will say this, Jesse, and you know this already, there's a lot of smoke. There is a lot of smoke.
There's a lot of smoke. Trying to figure out, now obviously I don't ever want you to speak out of turn, and I know you wouldn't anyway. I don't know what's impeachable. For instance, this Anthony Blinken thing. Okay, Anthony Blinken, not Secretary of State at the time, calls up some spy, gets a bunch of former spies to sign on to a letter. All right, that's dirty and dishonest and horrific. I don't know that that's impeachable. Nobody was elected at the time. Am I a little off track there?
No, you're not off track, but I would say this. Impeachment is often characterized as a legal circumstance where there's something, you violated chapter and verse, U.S. code, blah, blah, blah. Impeachment is a political tool, and I think we should remember that. And we saw it all too well during the last presidency. And so, it says high crimes and misdemeanors, but obviously that's in the eye of the beholder. And I would say regarding Mayorkas, and quite honestly, regarding President Biden, they're not interested in following the law, certainly when it comes to securing our border. And if that's the case, which it is, that might be seen where it doesn't say that's a crime of commission. It certainly can be considered a crime of omission.
No. Well, one thing that concerns me greatly, I know it concerns you as well, is Merrick Garland's conduct since that lapdog has been appointed Attorney General. We have tons of information on Merrick Garland, from going after school board parents based on a letter that the unions wrote him in conjunction with the White House, to now potentially stonewalling the Hunter Biden investigation. This is the top law enforcement officer in the United States of America. As you well know, if he's a political hack, and he clearly is, he can't stay there.
Well, let's recharacterize that, Jesse. And I know you're trying to use the standard of decorum, but you said stonewalling an investigation. The Democrats, and rightly so, would call that obstruction of justice if that's the case.
Yeah.
And yet that needs to be ferreted out. But if that is the case, impeachment is the least of the Attorney General's worries, in my opinion.
Even Keith Olbermann was saying similar things, comparing Tucker to a Nazi. He also, for good measure, decided to tweet about me because I said Tucker is going to be better off without Fox, and said something to the effect of, you got fired from Fox and NBC, what would you know about it? So first of all, you misstate the circumstances of my departure from NBC, sir. That's all I'm allowed to say about it. And as for Fox, there were widely reported facts that I was offered $100 million to stay there. But the record's very clear that I left voluntarily because I wanted to raise my family, something you don't know anything about, because no one would marry you and you have no children. You have a cold, lonely life in which you become a bitter, bitter man, something I wouldn't know anything about because my life is joyful and I've managed to raise my own children. And someday, I hope you have that pleasure, but I don't have high hopes it's going to happen.
That's one of the most vicious things I've ever seen. Joining me now, I love her, Megyn Kelly. She is, of course, a journalist, host of the Megyn Kelly Show, which is on SiriusXM Triumph Channel 111 every weekday at noon. You can find her at youtube.com/Megyn Kelly. Also, probably need to add to that, soon-to-be convicted murderer. Megyn, that was That was brutal.
Brother Kelly, it's so good to see you. You know, there wasn't a more deserving man in media. Normally, I'm not that mean, Jesse, but he deserves it. He just deserves it. All he does is spew invective. He set me up a couple months ago because one of the few women who ever agreed to date him was a woman who's at MSNBC right now named Katie Tur. And he goes on his show and just absolutely reveals every secret of his relationship with her, any favor he ever did for her. He just has absolutely no class and, as I demonstrated, no connection with the truth.
Megyn, before we get to some Tucker stuff, which you've been breaking down, I actually want to ask you about Olbermann and maybe media in general. You obviously have a wonderful life, but I'm pretty new to this. I've only been doing this for 5 years, and I can't believe how many basket cases there are in this business. I mean, as a child, I watched Keith Olbermann bring me SportsCenter, and I laughed, and my buddies would go around and we'd laugh about the highlights. And now this guy is a nutball who tries to chirp at me all the time. Was he always a nutball? Is it the media industry that turns people into nutballs?
I do think it attracts more than its fair share of nutballs right from the get-go. And then it adds fuel to the fire. Being on camera, getting a big ego, getting a big paycheck, it can be very corrupting if you're not like a strong person with solid values going into it. I mean, I remember I was at Fox back in the days where O'Reilly and Olbermann were warring every week. It was so nasty between the two of them. And I talked to Bill one time and I said, would you ever go to MSNBC? You know, like if Fox didn't do right by you? And he said, sure, I'd go there. And I said, they'd have to fire Olbermann first. And he said, they'd have to set him on fire. That's our industry.
Okay, speaking of our industry, you've been breaking down the Tucker stuff a lot, and you probably have a more unique insight on this than really anyone else I can think of besides Tucker himself. What are you talking about?
I just think it's absolutely disgusting how Fox not only fired him, but is clearly determined to destroy him. It's not enough to fire the guy from his number one show that has made Fox millions of dollars. Now they've got to like rub his nose in it and make sure his audience knows he needs to be unwatchable. He's a terrible man. He's a pervert. He's, we take your pick. There's a new article every day, which is clearly all being orchestrated by Fox News's PR department. But I can't blame the PR department because she wouldn't be doing that, Irina Briganti, who runs it, without orders from on high to take him down. You know, the main goal right now is to drive a wedge between Tucker and his audience so that they won't leave Fox News. They're hemorrhaging viewers at 8 p.m. Hemorrhaging. Just give you one example. Last Tuesday, when Tucker was there, in the key advertising demo of 25 to 54-year-olds, he pulled, I think it was a 445,000. Might have actually been even higher. This Tuesday, it was 145,000. I mean, the number of viewers who are tuning out, and in the overall, I think they lost 600,000 viewers. So the viewers are angry at 8 p.m. They've taken him away without an explanation, without any fairness to him. Every day they drop another hit piece on him. There's a clear threat that they have some Oppo file they'll be leaking. What more could there be? They hit him every day. For what? What did he do again? Did he cost the company, money? No, he wasn't behind the Dominion settlement. That wasn't a Tucker Carlson problem. That was other talent and executives. He won for them. He put points on the board. He made them relevant. He got them through the Trump era, which was a very tricky time in conservative media. And for that, he gets the boot. And they try to besmirch him in front of his wife, in front of his kids, in front of his audience, because they don't want the audience following him. It's disgusting.
Megyn, this is the kind of thing that scares people because they like truth tellers. It's why your show is so popular. It's why Tucker's show is so popular. People are hungry for that now. And it seems like the gigantic media organizations are purging that. Am I imagining it? Because that's what it seems like. And if that's what it is, what does that mean for the future of people seeking out truth in some way?
There is an element of that. I know I, like everybody else, don't know what the real reason is behind Tucker's firing, but it seems like that's at least an element of it. And if you looked at Tucker's statement last night, where he didn't address any of this head on, that to me seems what he was trying to telegraph. That you get in trouble in this country for telling the truth, but audiences respond, that we're now ruled by essentially one party, and that the elites who are in control will decide what can and cannot be discussed. And if you try to color outside of those lines, they shut you down. I mean, that to me seemed like he was trying to say Fox is part of that one party system. And while they try to masquerade as like, we've got your back. We're going to tell the conservative side of the story. In truth, they're just as elite as anybody else and don't want certain cows being touched. And Tucker touched all the third rails. I mean, there was nothing he wouldn't do. There was no orthodoxy to which he subscribed, which is one of the reasons he was interesting and a threat. So in the era that is now anti-Trump in Murdoch world, which is 100% the case if you read the Journal, if you watch the Post, if you watch Fox, they've turned on Trump. They're over Trump. Where Tucker, I wouldn't say he's pro-Trump, but he's definitely like pro-Trump's voters. He understands who they are and what's important to them, doesn't talk down to them, doesn't dismiss their worldview as just deplorable or not mentionable. He now may have outlived his usefulness. And that too is absolutely disgusting because Trump is probably going to be the GOP nominee. And then what's Fox going to do?
Megyn, in other much smaller news, Don Lemon is so out of a job that Rick Ross is offering him a job at Wingstop. Here he is.
Biggest boss in the game, Ricky Rose, just found out Don Lemon was terminated from CNN. Damn, Don. But guess what? The brothers got your back. We hiring it at Wingstop. And for some reason, I believe you know what you're doing with them lemon pepper wings. So, man, just send over your resume. Well, for 17 years. But I'm going to make sure I get you in front of the right grill, brother. Stay solid.
Okay, one Wingstop is delicious. Two, Don Lemon's a piece of trash, and you've been talking about this for a long time. He's always been a piece of trash, but he's out because he's boring, Megyn. If he had the #1 show, he wouldn't be out. He's out because he sucks at television. He was only there because he's black and gay.
He's the worst. And when Jeff Zucker got the boot, his big boss, the first thing Don Lemon did was go on the air that night and remind everybody he's black and gay. He literally went on the air and was like, I'm black and I'm gay, just in case he forgot. I'm unfireable. And so he's just been, I would chalk it up to douchebaggery. That is the reason he's no longer on the air. Douchebaggery toward women, toward his other colleagues, toward his audience, toward the facts, toward half the country, also known as Republicans. He hates them. And this is a time where CNN is ostensibly trying to rein some more Republicans back on its air as guests and back at home watching CNN. And what is one of his first acts out of the box? It's to tell Vivek Ramaswamy, GOP presidential candidate, he doesn't get to have an opinion on American history because his skin, while brown, is not quite dark as Don's. That Don has a prior claim to all discussions about American history, African American history, because he's black. So Vivek doesn't know anything about it because he's not dark enough. I mean, that just happened on the air right before he was fired. And yet you have people like Al Sharpton out there saying, we need an explanation. This is deeply wrong. Well, how could this possibly happen? Well, open your eyes because it's very clear to all of us how this happened.
It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
That was a pretty good line, I'll be honest with you. Joining me now, Pedro Gonzalez, senior writer of Chronicles, a magazine of American culture, and I know him as the senior fellow for the American Principles Project. Okay, Pedro. Trump comes out and he says yesterday, I'm not doing any debates. I didn't agree to any debates. Who said we would do these debates? And I don't believe he's going to be up 40 points by the time it's debate stage. If he even is around, even if he is up that now, he's not going to be up that then. But if he is, I'd say it's the smart move. Is it the bravest move? No, but why would you debate if you're really up 40 points? I'd skip him too. I think it's smart.
Right. Well, Jesse, thanks for having me. Honestly, I think the thing that really upsets me is that we're being robbed of fantastic one-liners like that, because I agree. I think that was one of the things that I think made Trump such a phenomenon, is his ability to just completely mock and humiliate and undress his opponents regardless of who they were. And that's exactly why, for example, I think kind of related to this is why the worst people in America are happy that Tucker Carlson is no longer on the air. Why? Well, because apart from telling the truth every night, Tucker was also very good at making powerful people look and sound stupid. And that is not really the Trump that we have anymore. You've got this Trump who's, on the one hand, you can make the argument that you just did that, well, the polls have him up right now, but I actually don't think that means much because, there's an elephant in the room, and that elephant in the room has not entered the race officially yet to challenge Trump, at which point things could rapidly and dramatically change. But more importantly, I think that it speaks to this kind of fundamental shift in Trump, where in the Trump of 2016, you had this really confident kind of force of nature. And now you've got a guy that's kind of like angrily lashing out that all of the Republican Party processes are not run by him in any ways. Why should he debate? No one has the right to challenge him. It's this very kind of like under siege mindset that you've got coming from Trump, which doesn't really exude confidence.
Do you think he's really up like that? I mean, Donald Trump, I would argue, is probably still the most popular Republican in America. 40 points more popular than DeSantis, I don't know, but I would guess he's still the most popular Republican. Do you think it's state by state wise a lot closer than that?
It really is difficult to know because, again, the only, I think, viable for Republican voters, the only viable alternative to Trump has not entered the race yet. We actually don't know if DeSantis is going to enter the race yet, right? Because look at the rest of the field and the people that are actually in the runnings. And I mean, I think the polling for those people actually does reflect reality. But right now around DeSantis, it's sort of like, do you support him for president? Well, he's not officially running yet. And there's all these questions as to whether or not he will run. And maybe we can actually get an answer by looking at how the Trump campaign is acting toward DeSantis. Because if it's actually true that if those massive poll numbers do reflect reality, then why is Trump doing things like his campaign his campaign advertisement that he released the other day? It's in focus entirely on DeSantis. Whereas Biden's big campaign ad that was also released in the last few days was entirely focused on Trump. So basically, Biden is running a general election, and Trump seems entirely focused on not Biden, but DeSantis. And now you've got this story that Trump is reportedly trying to actually make it so that essentially try to keep DeSantis out of the race, because whether or not he enters the race seems contingent on this resign to run law being passed. It basically allows DeSantis to run for president without resigning the governorship. Trump is trying to intervene reportedly to prevent that from happening, which would effectively keep DeSantis out of the race. So again, if Trump is so far and away ahead of him, why does everything he's doing seems to suggest that internally they're not quite as confident, and in fact they're afraid of DeSantis?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I've thought the same thing. I've spoken to you about that before. He acts like it's really, really close. He acts like it's anyone's game. He doesn't act like he's 45 points up. I suspect they have internal polling showing this race to be very close. All right, let's focus on DeSantis for a moment. So DeSantis is overseas. Well, here he is.
Xi clearly wants to take Taiwan at some point. He's got a certain time horizon. He could be emboldened to maybe shorten that horizon. But I think ultimately what I think China respects is strength. So I think our policy should really be, to shape the environment in such a way that really deters them from doing that. I think if they think the costs are going to outweigh whatever benefits, then I do think that they would hold off. And that should be our goal.
Pedro, I love Donald Trump's foreign policy. A lot of people did. You probably did yourself. I don't know what Ron DeSantis's is yet. I haven't heard a lot that I dislike. It's not like I'm nervous about it, but I don't know. What is it?
Well, it's difficult because he's never been the president, right? So we can evaluate him based on what he says and some of the things that he's done in Congress. And I think that it speaks to DeSantis not being the neoconservative Trojan horse that people are trying to paint him as, by the fact that we can look at, for example, he opposed arming so-called Syrian moderates who were not actually moderates. I mean, these people were vicious killers. And DeSantis was opposed to that because he understood that, look, in the Middle East, these fairy tales of like good guy versus bad guy, these things don't actually work in certain parts of the world. And the moderates are just as insane and bloodthirsty as the bad guys, right? And so I think his ability to kind of be deliberative and to explain why he takes the stances he does, and then to shift his positions based on the information that's available, it shows that he's not an ideologue. Some people obviously interpret that as, well, he's just a kind of weather vane, but no, actually that's called leadership. Look, people have completely forgotten that we actually came very close to bombing Iran under Trump. I was really livid about this, and so was Tucker Carlson, because you had the Trump administration basically threatening to specifically target these heritage sites that go back to Roman times, sites that go back to antiquity, saying that we're going to deliberately destroy these things just to kind of infuriate Iran. And Trump changed his position on Iran basically in response to his base telling him, we don't want a war with Iran. And so I think that it's actually okay for people to make decisions based on the information that they have. But it's just difficult to evaluate DeSantis because he's never been president. But I think that the most that you can say, the truest thing you can say, is that he's not a neoconservative. The neoconservatives hate him. Bill Kristol, an arch neoconservative, David Frum, name your neoconservative villain. They all hate DeSantis. They all seem to hate him more than Trump.